I wanted to try out a bit of a different format for Riftbound videos because so many of you have asked me for gameplay videos, both in the Riftbound community Discord and then just in generally in comment sections. So I wanted to try it out, but Tabletop Simulator isn't the best viewing experience, a great tool for what we're trying to do with Riftbound, but the viewing experience leaves a lot to be desired. So I've done some video editing magic here, and hopefully it's a better viewing experience than just what raw gameplay would be like. Anyway, let's jump into a Misfortune versus set. My opponent in this set is going to be Marshall. I'll leave his Twitch linked in the description. He also runs Riftbound Report on Twitter, and he's one of the Discord mods on the Riftbound community Discord. So a big part of the community. Let's see where this game goes. I decided to run Reaver's Row as my first battlefield, not for really any particular reason, though it is nice to be able to confirm a turn 2 Misfortune Buccaneer into Reaver's Row because she's going to be nice and safe there, and she's basically a guaranteed point. But as of this moment, playing Misfortune doesn't really give me a strong opinion of my starting battlefield, and frankly, most of the battlefield lineup will change for Misfortune and most of the other recently revealed characters, so I'm not really putting a lot of brain power into that dynamic of playing the game right now. My opponent is randomly selected to choose whether they would like to go first or second, and they decide to go second. Our opening hand is Misfortune, Teemo, Seal, and Snapvine. I mulligan away the Teemo. Mulliganing away the Teemo is perhaps a little bit greedy because any 2-drop is pretty good in this spot because I get to move up for a quote-unquote free point and then Bounty Hunter move to another battlefield and get another free point. But I decide to mulligan both Teemo and Snapvine looking for our more premium cards. Not to say that Snapvine isn't premium either, it's just a large investment and we don't know if we're going to be able to afford that. Kind of just depends on how the tempo of the game plays out. We find Cythria, First Mate, and Gust after mulliganing, and an important note here is that we also see one of our 5 Chaos Runes, confirming to both us and our opponent that we're going to have the option of playing Misfortune Buccaneer for our point on turn 2. Obviously, we just play the Cythria and pass here. Our opponent gets an extra rune for going last and plays Arena Bar to pass. This is about our ideal turn 1s on either side, so that's pretty good. We push out the Cythria for the first point, and really we only have 2 plays. We can either Misfortune to Reaver's Row, or play the First Mate and ganking Cythria over to the other side. I opt for the First Mate play, leaving us with 4 maximum runes instead of the 3 maximum runes we would have had after playing Misfortune Buccaneer, because she has a power cost associated with her, and that way we have the option of accelerating Misfortune next turn if we need to. It's unlikely that we'll need to, but there's a very small difference between these 2 plays, and I would rather have the option of being able to accelerate next turn. We end our turn with 2 points up and with Cythria quote-unquote protected by Reaver's Row. On opponent's turn, they tap 4 and cycle an Order rune for an Order Seal, or a Seal of Unity, tapping that Seal of Unity to play set and pass their turn. So they've set up a set for their following turn, a relatively passive play for them. We take our point for hold and draw into our second Cythria. We give ganking to Cythria using Misfortune Bounty Hunter, and we move her across for a Conquer point at Windswept Hillock. Then we tap 5 and recycle 1 to play a Seal of Strength, tapping that Seal of Strength so that we can afford Misfortune Captain, opting to play her into our base where she's going to be a bit safer. Looking back at this turn, I think I should have played Misfortune Buccaneer to Reaver's Row now instead, because I could in theory lose quite a bit of tempo here if my opponent uses Challenge on set to take out my Captain Misfortune. Opponent pushes their set to Windswept Hillock, starting a showdown with my Cythria, and in this moment I actually consider gusting my own Cythria because it's unlikely that I'll get a lot of value out of Gust in this matchup, but I decide to hold it to potentially bounce a First Mate in the future, which could be a ready proc and make a huge difference in the closing turns of the game. Speaking of First Mate, our opponent plays a First Mate to ready their set and moves their set to Reaver's Row with the ganking ability granted by Windswept Hillock. Before doing all of this, he tapped the Arena Bar to give First Mate a buff, something he did earlier with set 2, but I forgot to mention. Our opponent then adds Challenge, targeting Set and my Misfortune, an absolutely huge tempo swing for them. Back to my turn now, I tap 4 and I cycle a Chaos Rune to play Misfortune Buccaneer directly to Windswept Hillock, which is now open. I struggled to decide if I should hold the Rebuke here or use it. Ultimately, I decide to use it, but I think there's a good argument for holding it too. Now with the battlefield empty, I simply move First Mate to Reaver's Row. I did immediately realize that I would have preferred to have done this in a different order, ending the turn with First Mate on Windswept Hillock and Misfortune at Reaver's Row. That way she would be a little bit more safe, especially while I have a Gust to bounce the First Mate, and if I wanted to protect him, I could, regardless of which battlefield he was at. So this definitely was a mistake. Mistakes happen. It's important to recognize them so you can improve your gameplay pattern in future games. Opponent starts their turn by pushing their buffed First Mate against my non-buffed First Mate, so I simply use the Reaver's Row to leave. I could have done this with Gust if I was at Windswept Hillock, but like I said, mistakes happen. Opponent then goes for Wild Claw Shaman, a new card, removing the buff from First Mate and granting it to Shaman, readying them, and pushing the Shaman to Windswept Hillock, taking out my Misfortune. In this moment, opponent cheats accidentally. I think in their mind they knew that Shaman and Misfortune were supposed to quote-unquote trade, but they were intending to use Set's ability to recall the Shaman, so in their mind, Shaman wasn't going to quote-unquote die here, but they keep the Shaman at Windswept Hillock, taking a conquer point, which should not have happened. The Shaman and the Misfortune should have traded with each other, and if he wanted to keep the Shaman, he would have to use Set's ability, which would recall the Shaman, and the opponent would never get a chance to conquer. This was totally accidental cheating, and it actually happens a few times in this set. I'll point it out every time it happens, so there's no confusion, but just keep in mind, any cheating that happens here is totally accidental. We're playing very casually here, and I assure you that Marshall was not trying to scam me out of a game, though it does happen a suspicious amount. No, seriously, Marshall was definitely not trying to cheat me intentionally. On my turn, I simply tapped 4 to play 2 Cythria and pass to the opponent. Perhaps this game could have gone differently if the Shaman weren't at Windswept Hillock and I could go get the 7th point of the game with my first mate. The opponent plays Set onto Reaver's Row, using the bar to give him a buff. Opponent passes, and we draw into challenge. Certainly not what I'm looking for right now. A bullet time would give us enough pressure to close out the game, giving us the victory, but in this case we're going to have to try and be a bit more creative. I push my buffed Cythria and my first mate to fight against his Wild Claw Shaman, which again shouldn't be there in the first place. He lets it through, and I take the 7th point. I pass back to him, he takes the 7th point as well for holding at Reaver's Row, then goes for a Misfortune Accelerated, pushing it to Windswept Hillock, and readying one of the runes that he spent on Misfortune. Unfortunately, I know that my Rebuke is worthless here, but I'm hoping maybe the opponent makes some type of mistake here, so I bounce his Misfortune with Rebuke. He has enough energy to just play Misfortune again, and go for a similar play that he ends up going for, but he opts for a different line, which I'm not sure was better, but it's an option. He retreats Set to base, and then plays a first mate to ready Set and pushes Set to Windswept Hillock. He could have done all of this with the Misfortune, which would have been, I think, a bit better, but regardless, it closes out the game and opponent takes game 1. We move into game 2 and I pick Zorn Warrens for my battlefield, and the opponent picks Targon's Peak. I opt to go first, and I end up with a really solid first hand. Fighting against my general principle of trying to mulligan as many cards as possible, I decide to keep my opening hand. Similar to last game, I'd lead by tapping 2 and playing Cythria and passing. Our opponent then does the same, leaving up a rune from the extra room they got for going second. On my second turn, I go for a snap play of Misfortune to Zorn Warrens. On Conquer, I discard a Traveling Merchant, allowing me to draw a card, and Cythria gets a buff for the fact that we played a unit, not a recruit. I also move her to Targon's Peak to get the 2nd point, and readying 2 of my runes from the Targon's Peak effect. We have a short discussion on the opponent's turn about Shen, a new card. Opponent was unsure if he would get the buff from playing Shen, specifically from the shield effect, and after clarifying that they would not get the buff but Cythria would get the buff, my opponent plays Shen onto the battlefield as an action. Now this is another case of accidental cheating. He does this despite not controlling the battlefield. To be able to play a unit onto a battlefield, you must control that battlefield. Ultimately, this line of quote-unquote cheating from my opponent works out for me better than it does for him, because I simply gust the Cythria, leaving the illegal Shen with just 3 might against my Misfortunes. Opponent closes out their turn by playing the Cythria that we bounce to their hand, and at the start of my turn, I take 2 points for holding. In this case, the opponent's cheating really helped me out, so I probably shouldn't be complaining. Again, accidental cheating. Marshall was not trying to scam me out of the game. As if the universe was trying to correct that injustice, I make a pretty embarrassing mistake here, giving my MF ganking and then moving her to Targon's Peak to quote-unquote protect that battlefield or protect Cythria in some way. But if I really wanted to do that, it probably would have just been better for me to retreat her to base, setting up for a stronger turn the following turn, especially against Orange, who's going to have cards like Snapvine, which could very easily clean up this board. With my energy for turn, I simply play Misfortune Captain to base. Opponent does exactly what I was talking about, and Snapvines my Buccaneer, pushing the Cythria to Zorn Warrens and discarding a Soaring Scout to draw a card after conquering. On my turn, I take the point for Cythria holding, and I follow up with my own Snapvine while playing a Seal for a future turn, granting Cythria ganking with my Legend ability so that I can go to Zorn Warrens myself and get a Conquer point. At this stage of the game, I'm feeling pretty good. I've got Bullet Time in hand, Warwick in hand, both of which are great at closing out the game, and I'm just 2 points away from victory. The opponent challenges my Misfortune with their Snapvine after pushing it to Zorn Warrens and killing off my poor Cythria, and they also choose to develop a Leona. I move my Snapvine to Targon's for the 7th point and passing, leaving up 6 energy. Oh, and I also tap a Seal of Strength to play another one. Believe it or not, this could potentially matter in a future turn because it's important to raise the maximum amount of damage that Bullet Time can do. which obviously playing an additional seal kind of does that. Opponent plays a Cytherea and readies that Cytherea by playing a first mate, pushing them both against my Snapvine. I simply cast Bullet Time with maximum damage, cleaning up his board, and opponent concedes because I will simply win the game by holding the point at the start of my turn. Moving on to the final game, it's a Targon's Peak and a Reaver's Row. My opening hand is a little heavy, and I don't love keeping Rebuke in most cases, but I think it's extremely important against set, so I opt to mulligan the Warwick and the Misfortune Buccaneer. Misfortune Buccaneer because I already have one in the champion slot, and Warwick because he's mainly going to be used for closing out the game, and hopefully we can just find him later or Bullet Time to do a similar thing. Stop me if you've heard this before, we play Cytherea on turn 1 and pass. Opponent forgets to take their extra rune for going second, the entire reason someone might want to go second, and I miss it, so the last game is a little bit tainted here, just because they don't have that extra rune and neither player noticed it. For whatever it's worth, I went back and checked on his Twitch VOD, and the only legal card he had in his hand to play at the time was the first mate, and I doubt he would have played that card anyway. Obviously it affects future turns, but as far as turn 1 tempo goes, it didn't really change anything. On my turn 2, I play the Misfortune Buccaneer over to Reaver's Row and move my Cytherea to Targon's. One thing I'll mention here is that I'm kind of sad to be going down to 0 Chaos Runes because I'll need to draw 2 more before the next turn rotation if I want to cast Rebuke against an advancing set, but my Misfortune is definitely worth the risk and totally worth developing. Opponent plays Leona and passes, a relatively average turn. He's just setting up for the future because I have the tempo advantage right now. I take 2 points for holding on my turn, playing Misfortune Captain to base, using Misfortune Bounty Hunter to move Cytherea to the Reaver's Row and returning Buccaneer to base. This way, even if the opponent has something really aggressive like set plus Showstopper, I can simply retreat with Reaver's Row and I'm absolutely not risking a Misfortune Buccaneer at all. Worst case scenario, I'm risking a Cytherea, and even still, I can Reaver's Row her away. Obviously, there's still bad things that could happen, like challenge, but that's happening regardless of where I'm at, so there's no reason to play around that specifically in this case. Opponent pushes their Leona to Targon's Peak and plays a set right to that battlefield. I take a point for holding and I go for Rebuke on set. The opponent tries to use challenge in response, but unlike the other instances of cheating that happened in this set, I do actually notice this one and say that, hold on, you can't cast challenge here because you would need to use a reaction card to respond to the Rebuke, and obviously challenge is a action card, not a reaction card. So their set is returned to their hand. I tap a rune to float an energy, then move Misfortune Captain to Targon's, readying that exhausted rune. I made a small error here, forgetting that Leona's shield ability would give her +1 might while defending here, but I just accept that trade. Our 2 units trade with each other, the Misfortune Captain and the Leona, and then I eventually just move up the Buccaneer to Targon's Peak. My opponent could have used the previously mentioned challenge here during this combat to kill off my Buccaneer, but they opted not to. I decided to also play first mate for my hand to ready that Buccaneer and bring her home to safety, happily sitting on 6 points going into my next turn and what is hopefully the final turn. Our opponent goes for the classic set Showstopper combo, moving his card to Reaver's Row, and I retreat the Cytherea. Going into my next turn, I simply take the Conqueror point on Targon's Peak with the Cytherea that I retreated from Reaver's Row, and I push my 2 units against the set for a trade. I'm not sure what could have gone wrong here, but in my mind I thought, well, if something goes wrong here, I'm just going to cast Bullet Time to kill off all of my opponent's units, and then if nothing goes wrong here, I'm just going to push Warwick for the 8th point. Nothing goes wrong, and we close out the game with Warwick. So there you go. That's a Misfortune versus set game. Let me know what you thought of this format. I know it sounds like a little bit rambly as we're going through things, but I hope at least for new players, this is a good experience to kind of learn some of the thought process of what's happening as we play a game, and then also just kind of understanding some more interactions that maybe haven't come up in any of the games that you've tried. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Keep being awesome, and I'll catch you in the next one.